Player acquisition in South Africa. What converts and what doesn't?
Cool. So hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Panelists, welcome. I'm going to get straight into it just to be conscious of time. So welcome to today's panel on player acquisition in South Africa, what converts and what doesn't. So for those who aren't familiar with the South African market, it is often described as a mobile-first market, and it absolutely is. Most acquisition journeys start and end on mobile. But mobile-first doesn't mean, I would say, friction-free. And I think everyone here has different touch points that, but in South Africa and Africa in general, we see how trust is a massive component as part of culture as well as player journeys, but branding as well as what matters. So when we're looking at acquisition, just to open this conversation, when we're looking at customer acquisition cost, how this is rising in South Africa, when we look at channel fatigue, when we look at all these different elements, we see how new entrants into the country are incredibly aggressive. We see how a very, I'd say, broad marketing approach is changing the dynamics of the market. So I think today, as we start to unpack this conversation, panelists, I'm going to keep the questions broad. Let's try and answer it as articulately as possible, and let's get started. So for the first topic today, I want us to unpack the biggest acquisition illusion. And before we start talking about what is working, I think it's important to also unpack what's misleading us as a market. We have data-rich information in South Africa. Some of it is good, some's not. So I'm going to start off, Gail, with you. When we start on acquisition illusions, from a marketing leadership perspective, what is the biggest illusion in player acquisition in South Africa right now, in your opinion?
I think it's not just in South Africa, Gali, but it's a very common misperception, is an over-dependence on that last-click attribution. Ultimately, brand awareness drives that last click, but we're attributing it to a digital marketing channel in isolation at times. Yes, of course, performance marketing is very important, and having a robust and structured digital marketing strategy is incredibly important. But it really is just the final step of a much wider and much bigger acquisition portfolio. So I think in South Africa, we often focus on channel-specific metrics instead of looking at the bigger picture, because often awareness channels are harder to measure, a little bit less tangible, and you wouldn't see, if you paused an awareness campaign, you wouldn't see an absolute landslide, immediate landslide of performance drop-off immediately. It starts happening over time. And so I think that would be the big misconception, that if you don't, channeling too much budget the way of digital marketing, but not having any awareness channels optimized to drive that performance.
No, I think it's really interesting. And Henry, I'm going to come to you, seeing as yourself and Optimove have probably one of the most comprehensive views when it comes to the South African market with the data that you've got access to. If you guys look and analyze like a 90-day behavior, for example, around, say, retained value, taking what Gail said now about how that drops off over time, do you see any kind of disconnect between what looks strong at, say, like the acquisition level, but actually, may not be delivering value over time? Like, how does that look from what you guys see?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And what Gail said around how you look at the value of a player versus what drove the interaction, maybe there's a missed picture because you haven't quite got a more holistic or a deep enough view of what the player is engaging with. You then look that view then kind of from a acquisition-only lens is quite limited. Yeah. And if you don't then consider how much you're spending on that acquisition and how that translates to long-term value, and I guess I will always look at it from a retention lens as well as an acquisition lens, that inefficiency can be quite problematic because over time you can start looking at that initial moment, the FTD, and saying, this is what's working, and doubling down, and maybe spending a bit too much, and maybe starting to worry, okay, what's the bottom of the funnel look like? Because we don't really have a clear enough picture on that. I think that can be quite a pervasive problem, not just within South Africa, but as Gail mentioned, across multiple markets, where bonus spends, the types of players that are very aware of what bonuses they can achieve, can receive, starts to affect how the top of the funnel looks as well, and you end up with a bit of a spiral. So yeah. I think if you don't take that long-term view on even predictive view, maybe we'll come to that, of what a player could become.
Yes.
Eventually, maybe you start looking at things through too limited of a view, and you kind of drive yourself into the ground.
So, I mean, if we were to bring that back, and Yevhen, I'm going to come to you as like the technical expert on the stage here. I mean, if we start looking at this from like a strategic tech perspective, platform, and how we're actually reviewing what success looks like, I mean, are operators actually measuring success correctly if we look at it from a technology standpoint? Like, what do you see in the market?
Well, from the platform perspective, and of course, good platform can give you a lot of different metrics. But the specific is going from the first time deposit, let's say, into the second time deposit. Because if the platform gives you a lot of triggers, you can actually engage actively. I think AI is definitely the tool that can also help you, segment behaviorally your players. But I think keeping that metric as the time to the second deposit, this is something that definitely provides a lot of, move into the LTV, full LTV, because the first time deposits is more the volume game, while the time to second deposit would always be, the quality, and actually trying to focus on those that will stay with you much, much longer.
100%. I think, we're seeing it even on our consulting side, that drop off from first deposit to second deposit. Sometimes as high as 40, 50% if you don't move it from A to B, and again, another 40, 50% from second into third deposit. By the time, if you don't have that retention component to support your acquisition efforts, by the time it even gets to VIP, you've got a single percentage. So, single digit percentage. So it's crucially important what you've just mentioned about leveraging your triggers platform as part of your acquisition. But let's go over to probably one of the more sensitive topics on this, which would be customer acquisition cost. Now, in South Africa, we're seeing that the CAC is climbing quite a lot as a result of competition intensifying, traffic becoming more limited, and budgets obviously being stretched a bit more thinly across multiple verticals. I think that pressure is going to grow consistently over time, and I think that for us as a market, it's important to understand when it comes to CAC, like how we're going to actually tackle this rising cost. So, Andre, I want to come to you first when it comes to CAC. As the operator on the stage, do you think that we're entering some kind of CAC arms race in South Africa when you look at what the competitors are potentially spending versus where you're at and how you're approaching that CAC cost to your business?
I definitely think there's early signs. There is no one can say there's no increase in the cost of acquiring a new client. And to your point, it has a lot to do with the number of new competitors into the market as well. It's pushing up the price. There's a pool of players that you can reach, and we're all gunning for the same pool of players. Digital inventory, to your point, is limited. So we're all kind of chasing the same end goal here, basically doing the same thing to get there. So I think it's quite important that we start thinking outside the box and look at other avenues. To Gail's point, what is the impact of brand? How much are you investing in that? But on top of that, I think there's also a big factor when you start looking at bonusing, because a lot of the increase in the cost of acquiring a new client has to do with the maturity of the market. Players are now aware, how things work. They know what to expect. They know where to find it. So there's almost like we in competition with each other with who offers the best bonus? You know, where do we offer the most value? And that in itself is pushing up, you know, the cost significantly.
I think bad practice in that also pushes that value up. I mean, players, yes, are becoming more educated, but beyond that as well, the bad practice of a few players in the market also educates that audience to behave in a particular way. So bonus abuse or bonus dependency carries from operator to operator. That's also going to influence your acquisition funnels. But you touched on a really valid point, which was brand. And Gail, I think this is a perfect point for you, seeing as you represent a brand that is incredibly well known in South Africa, which is the Virgin brand. In your perspective, do you believe that brand investment could protect an operator when we see this inflationary CAC environment, or does it more impact like short-term performance pressure, you know, which ultimately could mitigate over time once you become more established? Like, how do you see brand protection in that sense?
I think ultimately investing in your brand should be a key priority. We spoke about the you know, the infiltration of operators in South Africa. We're all trying to compete. The problem is that if you're too focused on performance channels, you will acquire a player, pay a significant amount of money to acquire that player, and they will almost instantly forget about you if you're not doubling down on your brand. I mean, your brand should be, I mean, I would be proud to double down on brand if I had my way, and I will shortly. I will paint the country red as much as possible so that Virgin Bet can become a staple in the country. It's not cheap, especially up front. Of course, the bottom line has to be considered. But from a punter perspective, if we're not reminding them why they need to play with us constantly, we're not just affecting our acquisition costs, but we also are affecting the lifetime value of the customer. So, I mean, to Henry's point, these metrics work hand in hand between acquisition and retention. No point of committing to this acquisition cost, but not backing it up to sustain that customer lifetime value.
Amazing. We touched on my next question that I had planned for you guys today in the previous panel, but I'm going to ask it, and it's just an open question for you guys, so this is to anyone who wants to try answer. And the question simply is, does localization beat budget?
Yes. I think the challenge between, in my opinion, for what it's worth, everything should be measured in terms of what it actually drives. Everyone can have a good idea. I think that if you look at localization in this market, in other markets, maybe it's just the cost of entry. Like, you can't really approach this market without having an approach that is local, is relevant. You then have to look at the impact, right? Are you investing in something that is driving value, right? Now, I think a lot of that comes down to the inability of operators to use technology efficiently to optimize content. Are you understanding whether that is relevant to that player? Because if you treat everyone the same, if you think that that acquisition channel means this type of content, you're ultimately working in a very biased way.
Yeah.
And so yes, to answer the question, in my opinion, but to take what you believe to be a personal and relevant approach through, you know, maybe the basics of more localized content, in reality, you are just meeting the minimum and probably kind of leaving it there.
Just to add to that, I think localization takes various formats. Oliver, in the previous panel, put it really succinctly. But localization is operations, it's product, it's marketing, it's messaging, it's how you translate that brand into the market. So absolutely, you need to invest in localization.
Yeah. I'm going to bring it back to you, though, Henry, on the next point here, because we're touching on like scalability as well here. Now, when we're talking about value and we're talking about funnels and we're talking about localization, you know, we know growth, or not all growth is equal. And I think when you're looking at like saturated markets or competitive markets, especially mobile-driven markets, I think it's safe to say that only certain acquisition channels appear to scale without compromising that long-term value. We've seen that there are preferences in acquisition channels. Any affiliate in the room will tell you that there are certain channels that they won't go and work with. And then obviously cost to that comes into it as well. So what I wanted to ask Henry, because again, you have the experience here, but when does scale become a quality problem? At what point do you then start seeing lower value players entering the funnel when you're trying to scale?
It's quite an interesting challenge. It's actually, I think, one that both Andre, in fact, I think everyone's already mentioned this in a way, but the reason that there is more competitive pressure is because this is becoming a more and more successful market. It has become internationally interesting for operators that maybe haven't focused on this market before to spend time in. These are very successful businesses. Most of the time, they're coming to this market with a lot of backing. They can look at data in often a very different way. Some of these are going to be our clients, some of them aren't. But I think when you start to look at it from the context of scale as a challenge, scale is the challenge, right? You are thinking about it, and often actually thinking about what's relevant, specifically relevant to South Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, some markets like this. You are immediately at scale in these markets sometimes, just by virtue of entering the market. But does that mean you're going to lose a clear picture of what actually is working? Well, if you're using the wrong technologies, yeah, absolutely. I think the challenge with scale then becomes, can you execute at the volumes required? Can you build content? Can you serve these players with the relevancy and offers that I think was mentioned here to the gentleman to my right? I think, yeah, so to answer the question directly, I think that it can happen in African markets as scale as the challenge almost immediately. Yeah. And to not have the technologies in place to extend the value of the player beyond the first and then second and then third deposit, you're going to start looking at things through far too limited of a lens and assume you're doing really well, and maybe you're not.
Fair points. Andre and Gail, I think this one is for either of you. When operators are looking at acquisition channels, especially for the South African market today, like what would you guys consider to be the acquisition channel that can genuinely scale in South Africa? Like what would be your primary channel that you would look at without having to reveal your inner secrets and so forth? You know, if you were to nail down one, let's say, you can speak in general terms.
I won't go into too much detail, but I would say social media, you know, it's a very versatile, environment. It offers you both performance and brand options. And I think that, I'm sure all of us in the room live on social media. I see one guy scrolling on social right now. So I'm just tuning your algorithm to Virgin Bet. It's going to start serving on your Instagram shortly. So yeah, that's the platform I really think we can scale on, because every value tier of customer lives on social media on one of those platforms. Some are more important than others, but I'll leave that to you guys to decipher.
Fair.
So I think what we were talking about is that I think my understanding of when we say scale, are we talking volume or value?
Yeah. I'll keep it open to your own interpretation, so we don't need to drill down specifically.
So if we're talking volume, my opinion is that social media, definitely, there's volume. You will acquire people, you will scale, you will grow. Retention, the chance of churn is a lot higher than a lot of other channels. The value is slightly lower, but it brings in a lot of volume, so you can scale. However, if you want to, let's say, scale the business with fewer people, higher value, longer lifetime value, lower churn, then you'd potentially rather look at something like, search, where it's intent-driven versus, it's social media is feeding the beast, but search, at least it's intent-driven. You're finding the right person the right moment that offers a lot of value to your business for a lot longer.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So I think what we've seen in a lot of other markets internationally, and I'm directing this to the operators, is an over-reliance on social channels often ends up with a kind of a spoilt child kind of operator, where they feel like there's a lot of, we can always just run some more ads. And you also that's not an environment you own.
Yeah.
Meta own Facebook, like all these operators, all these platforms at any point, and they do turn one number, they just increase the costs across the board. So the question is, does an over-reliance on these channels inherently lead to a lower level of control and forecastability of what new players can be?
I think, ultimately, it speaks to having an acquisition portfolio and not over-relying on a specific channel. Also, like, what drives search intent? Like, I think very rarely is someone just inspired to search, It's because we've caught them somewhere, we've got that awareness, we've been, working in the background. Is that only on social? No, it's, going to the airport. It's, watching TV, watching your favorite sports. There's multiple touch points, and I think that's the point of awareness, is to meet your audience where they are, and then like lock that in on that search intent and other like high performance channels.
And I'll add to that though, when it comes to meeting your audience where you are, I think the intention on how you show up also matters, because if you start misrepresenting something that you're offering, and one thing that I've seen in South Africa of late, which is very new, is people trying to promote VIP programs. Now, as someone that works with multiple VIP programs in South Africa, it's great to promote it, but if you're not advertising your VIP program on your website, it's just a banner. Or if you're not informing your audience of what it means to be VIP and you're offering a VIP deposit match, you go to the website and you just have a generic welcome offer, that's not a good ad. That's not a good acquisition strategy. You're misrepresenting something on your website, and that's the impression that's left. So I think showing up where they are, yes, absolutely important. Showing up with the right intention, even more so, because you capture that audience with the wrong message, that's what sticks. So just a 2 cents to add to that. But going back to a few of the points that we mentioned, acquisition, CRM, and looking at those feedback loops as well, I think we've all already agreed when it comes to acquisition, it doesn't stop at that FTD. It's about what happens next, the second, the third. But when we're looking obviously at the real measurement of success, when you're looking at payback periods and you're looking at your retention rate by cohort over a period of time, and you start looking at how to align acquisition and CRM, or acquisition, CRM, and VIP, we're looking at effectively the first 90 days, realistically. How much of your acquired audience have you retained within that 90 days, and how much are you able to retain beyond that 90 days? I was curious, Henry, and I'm sorry to throw you on the spot with this one, but in your opinion, do you believe acquisition should be measured on 90-day value rather than FTDs, or how do you see a measurement of true success?
Should we measure players at the 90-day mark versus the first mark? Yeah, absolutely. Is 90 days short enough time horizon to have a clear enough picture about player value in the initial engagement? Yeah, maybe. But if we think about the number of competitive offerings, knowing that players play across multiple offerings, if you look at the first 90 days to measure and then feed back that information into your acquisition channels, yeah, sure, you're going to be better. But in terms of converting players into long-term players, something that we often recommend to people is to take a predictive approach to their 12-month value. That can be really informative in terms of the bonusing structure, the types of journeys you take players down, the types of decisioning around campaigns, so which players should receive what what channel, preferred bonus type, all that good stuff. So to answer the question, yes, we should. But I think 90 days, if you were to look at what Optimove would recommend, is probably the minimum and relevant to this session, very helpful for acquisition. But for enabling a much clearer long-term view around the efficiency of the subsequent campaigns, then up to 12 months is the recommendation from our perspective.
Fair. We're seeing obviously a lot of changes when it comes to technology, from platform, from acquisition, AI, different solutions that are now looking at value detection, which will be the next point that I want to move to. And Yevhen, this one's for you. How are you seeing technology influence the way that we detect value? Are you seeing any major changes on your side from a platform perspective, an integration perspective? Well, what are you seeing in that space?
Well, I think from the platform perspective, again, the technology that is right now given, I mean the new generation of platforms, is definitely an ability to detect your client from basically a personalized perspective. Your AI tool will give you a chance to actually trigger different types of behaviors. From the first moment, what he's using, and then the recommendation engine will maximize the value that he is seeking, because he is also coming to us for value. So we need to basically spot on what he is looking for. So I think technology from that sense will give you a lot of measures. If you're giving a right BI tool, real-time integrated with the tool or already in the tool. But the value detection is basically where you cannot do it without the platform, because the platform itself tracks all the different elements. Of course, you need to have a good 2-3 marketeers that are able to read data, but the ability to actually segment and micro-segment and personalize the offering, this is where the tools are very handy. Not only to read data, but actually to build a very personalized. We were speaking localization. Probably localization is a little bit behind. We need to build one-person segments, like truly personal things.
Yeah.
And this is where sports combinations with different casino things is the winning definitely stuff. So where bonuses are actually targeting specific people. So when you measure, you immediately provide. And just the guys from the CRM tools, exactly real-time offering, because we're competing for speed. And the audience we're speaking about or trying to compete for are the guys that have definitely temptations to go to 2, 3, 5, 25 platforms at once. The ones they like, there will be a targeted offering, timely offering. They will probably have a high chances to stay.
We're actually seeing in South Africa now the consolidation between players that are holding multiple accounts, where the average is 5 accounts per player in South Africa, which is generally consolidated to 3 accounts after a period of time. And the influences there are multiple layers, from personalized experience, VIP, payments, limits, game options, as well as the platform user experience as well. So very on point. I want to pivot a bit, though, into retail. And I think, Andre, this is your side. In South Africa, which is a mobile-first market, how important is a physical presence as a bridge to establish trust and credibility?
So, I think you basically hit the nail on the head there. It's all about the trust. I think companies that go into it thinking it's a major acquisition kind of channel, and I'm going to put someone in the mall and I'm going to acquire thousands of people. It's not what it's meant to be. It's basically adding an actual touch point for the market to engage with the company and engage with the brand. It's that level of trust that they need to leave feeling it's an actual company. If I do make a deposit, I feel safe, I feel secure. I know that if there's a withdrawal, it'll come back to me. So it's 100% all about the trust, and not everyone's doing it, but I do think it adds that incremental value. Like you can't do it in isolation, but adding it to your mix definitely adds value.
Amazing. I'm going to pull one of the questions on the board just to be conscious of time before we run out. And I think this last question that's just come through here, are operators investing enough in onboarding experience, or does too much focus still sit on the initial click? So I'll open it up to the whole panel. The question should be in front of you as well, but if you'd like to turn around, it's there as well. Anyone want to have a crack?
I'll have a go. I think that there's a difference between an onboarding experience and what's happening within like the initial sessions, and you know, I think the difference between a reactive onboarding experience versus a static onboarding experience. One of the biggest challenges, and I think it's been mentioned a couple of times now, is like real-time engagement. Yeah. Say, for example, a player hits the standard acquisition, nothing special, hits the site, performs a few key moments within their first session, right? And then you start dropping them into a static, non-reactive welcome journey, onboarding journey. Of course, they're going to feel like they're not being spoken to at a relevant level. You have to be able to build that player profile and drop them into segments and campaigns that are reactive to, in real time, their preferences as and when they're built. I think we talked about this on our staff. Well, we talk about this all the time, but if you can't identify these moments as they're happening and respond to them as they're happening, you're completely missing out. So is it important to have is the investment in onboarding important? Absolutely, I do think it's underinvested, but creating a static onboarding flow that does not react and doesn't create relevant experiences in real time to those engagements, then you're not understanding that gaming happens, it's happening instantly all the time. Like, if you can't do that, again, don't invest in the onboarding if it can't be reactive, basically.
I'd love to get more input, but we have run out of time. So, there's a lot of great questions that have come through here. So I'd encourage everyone listening that if your question hasn't been answered or you have more questions to ask, please do approach the panelists with those questions. I mean, this is a massive topic. It's definitely not going to be covered in half an hour. South Africa is a market which it has endless potential. It's still growing. There's still opportunity to enter and get a piece of this incredible market. It's developed, and the players themselves are buying in more and more. So I think for the most part, for everyone that's listened, I hope that you take away a lot of good information out of this. To the panelists, thank you very much for your insights as well. And yeah, just enjoy the rest of the conference today, guys. I know it's been a bit of an interesting one for everyone. But yeah, thank you very much for your attention today, and enjoy the day.